Welcome to Difference Makers, the podcast that explores people making a difference across planet Earth. I am your host, Joni Readout. On this episode of Difference Makers, I'm here with Kevin Honeycutt. I was first influenced by Kevin when I got the pleasure of hearing him speak in 2010, going so far as quoting him in my letter of intent for my graduate school application. Kevin Honeycutt is a technology integrationist and a staff developer from Colorado Springs. He spent 13 years teaching K-12 art and now travels the country and the world sharing ideas with educators. He is a husband, father, grandfather, published author, and entrepreneur. In 2021, he partnered with his wife of 31 years to start his own company, Honeycutt Consulting, in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Thank you for being with us, Kevin. We're excited to hear about your difference maker experiences.
I'm excited to be here, Joni, and I'm just honored that when you're a teacher and someone remembers something you said, it touches you deeply. And I've never stopped being a teacher. When I'm out there working with teachers and doing staff development and having teachers come up to me and say, I saw you 10 years ago. I saw you 12 years ago. I'm starting to feel old, but I also feel like I'm writing on people with permanent ink, which is kind of nice.
Yes, and certainly being a difference maker, which is awesome. Who are the people in your life that have been difference makers, and how have those people been difference makers in your life?
I had to start with teachers. I went to school in 20 plus states growing up because my dad was an alcoholic and a criminal. And so every time he broke the law sufficiently badly enough, we would have to move usually within 30 minutes. So we get home from school and we were on the road again. So the sound of the highway and big trucks is in my blood. So traveling has always been very natural for me. But now, so I'm an example of that student that's in a school for a week. And so I think teachers often wonder, can I make a difference with kids when I don't see them that often or when I don't see them very long? And my answer to that is yes, absolutely. So some of the teachers that had the biggest impacts on me, I only knew them for a very short time. So I think faith can write on kids with fidelity in a very short space. I always say, I think you can flip a kid like you flip a house, and you can do it quickly. I think you can do it in an hour. I think you can do it in a day, and certainly can do it in a year. So what do you do when you flip a house? You notice the value that no one else saw. You invest in daily improvements and you watch the value rise. So that's us at the door, meeting that kid and believing in them all over again. And remember, our faith is their surrogate self-belief until they get their own, right? So,
Yeah.
so that's all they have is, and for some reason, I think a teacher's faith is stronger than the world's doubt. Like if 20 people are calling me names at home, but one teacher who dresses nicely, smells nicely, and shows up for work every day, she has more power in a way because she seems important. And it's weird, but when a teacher believed in me, it was stronger than my own belief. So these were teachers, and I met them all over and I can name them off. And, Sandy Martin was one who wasn't even my teacher. And there's an example of someone just standing in the hall that sees a kid go by, a hungry kid. And when I say hungry, I mean nutritionally, and I also mean spiritually. You can tell when a kid is struggling. I think there are people who are really sensitive to that. And I think if we don't wall ourselves off, we're always sensitive to that. So empathy, not sympathy. And she reached out to me and she noticed me that I was gregarious and social and asked me to be in the play. And I knew that wasn't going to work, that Honeycutt children weren't allowed to try out for plays or be visible in any way, because if we were visible and someone noticed and took too keen a notice, we might be back in a foster home. So our family were very covert. So for her to call my house and get my mom to say yes for me to be in a play, it was a 1 in a million shot. And my mom said yes. And so I'm in the play and And that's when I found something. I've been a keynote speaker, and I've been a playwright and a director and all these different things. And it all started with that one teacher. And that's one. I could write a book about each one of these teachers and their little 1 month effect on my life. So it's not about how long we have. It's about the fidelity of the connection when we do have a moment with a kid. And every day we have that chance. Every day is a new chance. So you don't give up, right?
Right. That's part of my mission with this work is exactly what you stated, that being mindful, whether you have the awesome opportunity to be an educator or doing something else, pursuing passions in a different way, being mindful of how quick we can leave an impression on someone or an encouragement and just helping everyone understand that it really is that. It's not just moments that pass by that aren't remembered or noticed by people. Gosh, yeah.
There are two sides to every coin. If you've ever gotten your feelings hurt, if you've ever been going through your day and had someone be unkind, and you wonder why, and you keep going back over it again and again and again and trying to figure out, and sometimes there is no why. People are just in a bad mood or having a bad day. The strength of that engagement in making you feel bad has a polar opposite. And that's the strength of somebody believing in you and doing the opposite and affirming you and noticing you. I had a student call me about 3 weeks ago. He's nearly 40 now. How old am I? And on that anniversary, of his birthday and that milestone of 40, he's thinking back to his first year in my classroom. And it was my first year as a teacher with a classroom. And he said, "Mr. Honeycutt, when I was in your room, I don't know if you knew, but I was being bullied and my life was really hard. It was out of control." He said, "In my life, I've been through a lot." He said, "But when I think back to your room," so the most important thing for teachers to know, and I'm ready to write this down, right? Coming from my student. When your students are talking to you, by the way, I don't need an evaluation. I can talk to my students and I can find out if what I did worked. It either worked or it didn't. He
Yeah.
said, "In your room, I felt seen." He said, "The most important thing that you can have kids do is feel seen. Everyone deserves to be seen." And I just, it touched me deeply. And I thought, I spent my whole career trying to make sure before curriculum, before any of that, are they on grade level, before assessments, any of that. Number one, you got to walk in and feel like this is home. You are home. I want to say to every kid when they walk in the room, welcome home. I know they've got a home at home, and you never know what that's like, but I want them to know this is home and whatever I've got to do. And so I always say, I want to bend the system to match the kid. I never want to bend a kid to match the system.
Got all kinds of permanent marker here. I'm just, yes. So in thinking about that, and the impact that teachers have had in your life, how have you been a difference maker? And you've shared a story of a student that's recently reached out to you, but how have you been a difference maker in the lives of others?
I think I'm probably good at the keynote speech because of moving so much, because I only had this little bit of time in every place I ever lived. So now I've got 1 hour, 1 hour. And I've talked to audiences of 5,000. I've talked to audiences of 500 or 50. I've talked to 1,500 high school kids in a gym in Michigan. This is the job. You got 1 hour. So it's like someone has a stopwatch and says, good luck. And the teachers are looking at you like, good luck. You're never going to be able to talk to our kids. And it's really interesting work because you're talking to all of the kids across all, every demographic, where like you might think you struggle to talk to 30, try 1,500. So what do you have to do in 1 hour to make a difference, to write on kids with permanent ink and leave them with something they say out loud to you 30 years later? Now, that's my job. And I could teach a course on this, is how do you make sure people remember, here's This is worth writing down, I think. Emotion cements learning. Let me go into some detail here. How you feel at the moment of instruction is forever tied to the instruction. If I feel stupid during math, then forever and ever math and stupid are tied together, right? So I think there needs to be a Hippocratic oath in education. The Hippocratic oath in medicine says, do no harm. The same thing should exist in education. A kid should never leave my room in worse emotional shape than when they arrived. I should leave them better than they were. So that starts with how they feel. Now, if you want to test whether or not I'm right here, how much do you remember about your wedding day or the birth of your first child or 9/11? What happens when strong emotion is present, the brain seems to remember everything with almost photographic memory with fidelity. And I think it's a survival thing left over from when we were upper Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, that we had to remember all the things that were present in a life and death situation so we wouldn't do it again. And we are the descendants of the people who were best at that. So our brains see emotion as necessary for memory. So all the days of school you went to that you remember none of had no emotion. So let me give you the deer example. All you listeners, I want you to ask yourself this question. Have you ever driven home, got all the way to your driveway, pulled in the driveway, and had this thought, I don't remember any of the drive? Okay, if that's happened to you, then this thing I'm talking about has happened to you, that your brain compartmentalizes and says, Joni, I'm going to let you think about lesson planning. I'm going to let you think about that walkthrough evaluation tomorrow. I'll handle driving. Okay, so I'll take level 1 awareness. You work on level 3. If a deer jumps out, I'll wake you up and get you back in the game and hit you with a shot of adrenaline. Are we good? And you say yes. And so now you're thinking about lesson planning. So even though you're driving, you're not cognizant of that driving, right? So if you go to a day of school and a deer never jumps out, you don't remember the drive. So what's a deer? A deer is that crazy teacher. A deer is that project-based learning. A deer is those centers that are so exciting that you want to talk about it at dinner. A deer is the difference between a kid coming home and you saying, Rachel, what did you do at school today? And she says nothing. And Rachel saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So Mrs. Readout, you know what she did? She had this really crazy thing that she did. And we all had to be part of this big game. And so we were all in like this murder mystery and it was so crazy. And we all had to write about it. I guess it was persuasive writing, but we didn't know that. We just thought it was a murder mystery. And it was so awesome. And she's acting like it's on Netflix or something. She took it so seriously. We felt sorry for her. So we played along. They're never forgetting that their whole life, because it was tied to excitement, emotion, and something unexpected. So your brain, Joni, craves novelty. It wants novelty. It's looking for, should I remember this? So if we're not always thinking, how do I make this important? How do I make a deer jump out, right? Whether that's taking out lithium in high school chemistry and it bursts into flames and you talk about that, or that crazy teacher that wears a costume to school. And usually it's us being vulnerable. Usually it's us acting in such a way that the kids think, oh my God, she's going to get fired. That's when you got them. That's when you got them. When you have no ego, college gets you ready to be a professional and you come with pedagogy and you have to think about rigor. Think about that word rigor. I hate the word rigor. It sounds medieval. Pillage and plunder and rigor. Rigor. It implies what? Death. It implies, why should there be rigor? It implies pain, right? I think we should replace rigor with engagement, right? A deer jumping out. It shouldn't be a ghost jumping out or a skeleton jumping out and scare them to death. Yes, a deer is important, but it's not mean. It's just a deer, right? So unexpected things that pop up in the middle of your learning, I think those are fine. I think they're already got their own feelings about driving. Some of them are scared to be driving. Some of them, they've got things they brought from home and all that stuff is intruding on their consciousness. And just to win their attention long enough to write on them in a way that they feel good about the day and good about the class and good about themselves. There's a lot that we do. There's a lot. I don't even know how to describe this to people who aren't teachers. I don't know how. It's complicated.
Yeah.
We're in the people business, and the emotion business. It's a mess. I love this mess, that we have and this opportunity every day. And you never know when you're going to get that student that she's been sitting there looking at you this way for 200 days. And today you're going to get her. Today you're finally going to guess your way through the minefield and you're going to get her. And sometimes you don't even know it. They call you when they're 30 and say, Mr. Honeycutt, I've had this phone call, by the way. Mr. Honeycutt, I just want you to know, you're the only teacher that ever held me accountable. I just want you to know I'm still in prison, but when I get out, I've got a plan. And that started in your class. And I'm like, I've gotten that phone call. I'm like,
Oh my goodness.
and by the way, and he said, I know you tried to reach me and I know I wasn't nice, but I got to tell you, I couldn't make the space to do what you believed I could do then. He said, even Jesus couldn't have done it then. But now that it's quiet in here, you know who I think of as I hear your voice still. Your voice is still talking to me. But before this, it was too loud. My dad, the abuse, the police. But I hear you now. And so if you can get over the fact that you're not going to reach them this year, not all of them, and it's not personal, get over it. It's not personal. You do the best you can. And sometimes your faith is invisible ink and it doesn't show up till later.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. But I've seen it. I've lived long enough to see it.
Yeah. And it's so fulfilling and it's so powerful. And it's something, you're right, only educators. And I think you have to be in the business a little while to understand. I think it took me a little while to understand that, right? Like I'm not going to feel direct impact every single day with every single kid.
Right.
But you do get the notes and the calls, and after a while, then your bucket just continues to fill.
The superpower, I'm convinced, is emotion. I've been in education for a long time. I think my first year in the classroom was 91. So a while. And I've seen it all. I've seen every movement that's come along since then. But the one thing I really do believe, and I've come to believe, is that the emotion has to be present. There has to feel like it matters. And if you've got to, whatever you've got to do to create that situation where it feels like it matters. So no students raising their hand and saying, Mr. Honeycutt, why do I need to know this? If they're asking that, you have not done job one. And job one is to let the kids know this matters. Now, sometimes that's something you've got to contrive. You've got to build. You've got to assemble that. You've got to say, Friday, the parents are coming, kids, and you're going to be the docents of your learning museum. And it's going to be you on stage. I'll film it, but I'm not doing it. It's all you. And this is dress rehearsal. And they're all like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So they don't exactly know why, but they know people are coming and you've created stakes. And that'll be why it matters for now. Because if you say, how am I going to tell you that I need to get you on grade level and that your word awareness and your ability to put together consonants is not on grade level, that's not a conversation we have. But you learn all of that because parents are coming on Friday. This is what we do. We assemble the circumstances and we create circumstances necessary to create the need inside every child, the intrinsic need to get where they need to go, to empower them to do what they're going to do with their lives, whatever that looks like. It's somewhere between clairvoyant and brilliant. Somewhere along that continuum. It's crazy. Am I a fortune teller with a crystal ball, or am I Nostradamus, or am I all of those things? You're all of those things. A social worker? Yes. A mom? Yes. A dad? Yes. An uncle? Yes. It's a mess, right?
Yeah. And you have to love the mess.
You do. We have to fall in love with the journey because we don't really get the destination. Moses never got to enter the promised land after all of that work. We won't be there, right? They say, and great teachers plant the seeds of trees they'll never sit in the shade of.
Yeah. And we trust and we believe. And then we eventually get stories like you've gotten about how to
if you ask for them. And this is why I'm telling all you teachers out there that are getting ready to retire. Look, I'm 57 years old and I'm still out there on Facebook and I'm still on Twitter and I'm on Instagram and I'm on YouTube with 2 million views. I'm not playing around. I am documenting because this is the important stuff. This is when the phone calls come and the Instagram DMs come from students that validate everything we thought we stood for. And I'm sad for the people who leave the career in their 30s thinking they didn't make a difference, because sometimes it takes that long for the echo to come back down the valley and get into your ear. But when it does, you got to write about it, because those young teachers, those first year teachers, those teachers who came out during COVID, good gosh, we've been through a lot,
Yeah.
right? They need to know from someone who's been there, and their students. So these are important stories. And I'm telling all you teachers out there, when we die and our grandkids are Googling us and they're asking, why was grandma a teacher? And they can't find evidence. In a time when we all had phones that would do video, why are we secret geniuses? So I'm saying, don't be snow global, be global. Share your story. What you're doing here, Joni, with the podcast, what you're doing is bringing people out and putting stories in the spotlight. We are story creatures, and this is a story job. We got to believe, right? And faith is not easy. It doesn't auto-generate.
Right.
It's got to be invested in hearing those stories. And we're living in a dark world. Would you agree?
Yeah. That's part of why we need the light, right? We have to hear from it's where you decide to live. That's what I feel like I have conversations with people a lot is how do you like I have students say to me, one just said last week, and it's not the first time a student said this to me, but why are you always so happy? And I said, well, because I choose to be, and I want you to be in an environment with someone that's happy. But
Mm.
that's an intentional choice I make. Just like it's an intentional choice that I have to make and build the belief and the faith that I have in every individual that sits in front of me.
Well, think of this. The student, okay, the pilot of the boat, whether it's a boat or a dinghy or a raft, doesn't have to know why the lighthouse stays lit. They just need to know there is a lighthouse. If they make their trip and they do it enough, they may become the lighthouse. But today he was asking why your light was lit. And you're saying, because I choose for it to be lit and I want to make sure you're around for there to be light. I always tell kids the best way out of darkness is to make your own light. And I'll tell them my story because I want them to know that I found light. And, you know, helping other people is what created that light and what maintains that light, right? I
Yes.
think the best therapy we can have, and a lot of us have demons that no one will know about and scar tissue that we don't show, and dark things have tattooed us in a way. And here we got these kids there. And I think if we don't acknowledge our scar tissue and show kids that we've been there, and not all of us have lived a tough life, that doesn't mean we're not aware, or that we don't have a relative or a dad or an uncle that we watched go off the rails and it hasn't affected us. I think sometimes we have to show our credentials, and I don't mean your resume, your emotional credentials, and for them to go, oh my God, that's happened to you. I didn't talk about my life in poverty and foster homes for the first few years of teaching. I don't know why. I know why, because I was embarrassed. I finally got out of college, had a degree, had a job, and had beat the odds. And I thought, well, I'll just be a stowaway in this career and hope no one notices me. And then I realized my students absolutely needed me to let myself be seen. And so I realized and this is something worth writing down here. Your biggest weakness is your biggest strength waiting to be shared with kids. It took me till I was in my
That's
mid 40s.
powerful.
Took me to my mid 40s to have that thought. I finally realized that my vulnerability was my strength. I had hidden it for so long. And I realized when I tell you what is hard for me, I give you a chance to help me. And a lot of people were like, I don't need help. I don't need help. I don't need help. That's not how you teach. Letting someone help you when you can pretend you don't need help is the biggest thing you can do. And even if they didn't really help you, but they feel like they did. And sometimes years later, you realize they did.
Yeah.
It's this arrogance we accidentally have when we try to not show our scar tissue. So when I say your biggest weakness is your biggest strength, that's what I found in my career. When I started talking about foster homes and poverty and trauma and my dad, kids would just cry and come up and say, you just told my story. You just told my story. And then suddenly I'm Moses. I can speak, I can talk, I have all this power that no amount of pedagogy and college training would ever have given me. kids, as Madeline Hunter said, kids don't care how much you know till they know how much you care.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about here, is this transactional thing where you share scar tissue and war stories, and they say, how did she do it? I did it, and you can too.
Yeah.
You can do it anyway. Don't prove people right, prove them wrong. It's so much more fun.
Yes. Yes, it is. You've mentioned a few attributes in some of the things we have to write down. But in thinking about difference makers, what are the habits or attributes that you see in people who are difference makers?
I think that they are listening. There are people who talk and people who lecture and people who are pretty convinced that if you'll just shut up and listen, you will benefit. And to me, that feels like arrogance, and always did. It's the people who listen and react. Good librarians are good at this. They know what book you need. They're thinking prescriptively about what you might need, but they can only do that if they hear your symptoms. If I'm guessing based on what I think I saw, again, that's an arrogant assessment and you might be wrong. It's the people who are tuned in. And it's hard. Think about this. How many kids were we designed to mentor at the same time? Here's what I think. If you've ever breastfed, you know that you could maybe feed two, but you can't feed six, and you can't feed seven, and you can't feed 25.
And I
And
have twins.
so there's no differentiated lactation. Write that down. So what is the universe is saying that, hey, human babies are complicated. So you're best off if you don't try to nurture more than two at a time. Otherwise, you'd be like a cat and have lots more nipples.
Yeah.
So that's the universe saying the human creature is a very specific creature, and it remains vulnerable for a very long time. But when it comes into its own, it's amazing. But in the early years, okay, but we were given an impossible job then. Some person during the Industrial Revolution said, we're only training people to work in factories. A bell rings, they eat. A bell rings, they go home. A bell rings, a bell rings, a bell. That's not where we are now. Every kid needs to be their own brand and know how to do things. And so here we are again with this impossible differentiated learning task. One person at the front of the room trying to raise 25 kids. How do you do that? I love elementary teachers because they've got some things figured out when they do centers and when they do grouping. Basically, you're turning it into family groups, little subgroups of 5, which is like a family. And each group can work together. Then you work with each group. That is brilliant. I wish high schools did this more. I think project-based learning can lead to that. I think the human thing is we're better in small groups. Broadcast teaching, 25 kids while I go wonk, 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 is the worst. It's almost painful. Its behavior is awful things, right? I asked 500 teachers at a time, how many of you went to school all these days? And there's so many days that you remember none of. And they all raised their hand and we all laugh. And I say, don't laugh. What was that? Punishment? Paying your dues? I mean, why is it funny on Charlie Brown when the teacher goes, wah, 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 wah?
Right.
Well, it's funny because that's how we remember a lot of it. It's that crazy teacher, that outlier, that exception, that difference maker. And yes, number one, they listen. They become tuned to each person. I do this 500 teachers at a time. I'm looking at the cross-armed shop teacher with 4 fingers, and I'm thinking about his day. I'm looking at the PE teacher reading a newspaper and not listening to me until I get his attention. They're all just students grown up.
Yeah.
You know, I'm looking at the administrator who can't get off his phone because he thinks the bus routes are more important than the keynote. So my job is to get every one of them to stop what they're doing and lean forward. That's my job. And so I've got to make it feel like what I'm about to say matters and leave them with something that changes their lives. And I've seen it. I've seen it. I made a connection with a teacher in Texas in August. August is my best time. I talk to faculties all over the world in August, and I launch their school years.
Yes.
I'm lucky. I'm honored to get to do that. I feel like that's God talking through me. Really, I wish I could claim credit, but sometimes the words are better than I know. They outdo my vocabulary, and I go home and I think, why did I say that? I've never said that before because this group needed it and it came through me. It's the craziest thing. Okay, so I'm getting ready to leave to go to the airport, and this teacher says, "Can I drive you to the airport?" And I'm like, "Wow, I was going to get an Uber." Okay. I'm thinking, I don't know this guy. He might like take me out in the country and make summer sausage out of me. I don't know him. But I do. I get in the car and he's driving me and he said, I want you to know something. I was going to resign this morning. And for some reason, I sat through your keynote and he says, I'm not going to resign now.
Whoa.
Now, who am I to even get to be that guy? Who am I to get to be that guy that he went one more year? And I hope to God it went well. And I hope to God he saw his value. And I hope, see, because I'm only there for 1 hour and I want to stay longer, but I'm off to the next city. And so that's kind of how it works. But what you want to do is anoint them and disjoint them and appoint them, right? And give them a mission. So again, you were talking, what are the attributes? I
Yeah.
listen, I notice, I look, I prescribe, I give them a mission. I remind them, by the way, I don't give them a mission. They already had a mission, but sometimes we get tired and we forget how
Mm-hmm.
important it is, or we just lose faith in our own mission. If someone comes along and reminds us that we're not crazy, that we're not in the wrong career, that we didn't waste all our money in college, that this matters, that we're never going to be wealthy, but we're always going to be rich. We have wealth. It's just tied up in kids. Caskets don't have luggage racks. Spend it while you're here. That's what we get to do. And I want them to glow when I'm done. And sometimes I get bus drivers coming up and custodians saying, I want to be a teacher.
Yeah.
And I'm like, sweetie, you are. Everybody at school is a teacher. We're outnumbered. We need everyone. When I get on the bus, I'm already at school. That bus driver and the way she runs that bus is the beginning of the school day and the end of the school day. Yes, you're important. You're the punctuation, the capital and the period, the capital and the exclamation point. Lady in the office, she's the heart and soul of the school. How she treats me when I come in for that referral, that's everything. The custodian with all those keys she went in the trash and got out the Jostens yearbook proofs, the school pictures that the poor kids couldn't afford. And
Mm.
she got in her car and she drove them to the trailer park and she gave them to the kids and she got written up. By the way, that was my mom. My mom did that. Everybody matters and everyone can be a difference maker. You just got to want to. And once you are, you can't go back. You can't go back to just go doing the maximum minimum and getting your paycheck. If that's what we wanted, we wouldn't have become teachers because it doesn't pay enough, right?
Right. That's it. And everybody can be a difference maker.
Every day, every moment, every hour. I don't care if you've got 1 hour. I love your theme. That's one of the reasons I wanted to be on your show is because this difference maker thing is a really big deal. It's not just a name. It's kind of, I think every college should be teaching this. And college didn't teach any of this. We had one class called Psych of the Exceptional Child, and that's supposed to cover everything. Um, we paid all that money, and most of us started learning the minute we got our job.
Yes.
All we bought was a certificate. The rest of it was us again. So
I want to thank my guest today, Kevin Honeycutt, and all of our listeners because the real question here today is how will you be a difference maker? How are you a difference maker? Is it some of the same things that Kevin is doing? Or maybe something you want to do differently? Remember, you have the ability to be a difference maker for others, and others need you. We all impact people on a daily basis. Why not be the difference maker in the lives of others?